So Alice Eve, you're part of this really wonderful limited series on epics, Belgravia. You play Susan, the daughter-in-law. And in the novel that Julian Fellowes wrote, he described Susan as more intelligent than her peers, more intelligent than those around her. It's got to be flattering to be asked to play that role. But so much of what we see of Susan, especially in the beginning, is just her reacting to people. So I particularly think about that first scene at the dinner table. You could just talk a little bit about that character and how you approached her.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if this is a theme with characters I play. I found the same thing in Star Trek. JJ would talk about how when he introduced me, he didn't want people to know if I was a goodie or a baddie. And the same thing happened with this. I think that some people felt with Susan when she first was introduced that she maybe was not a favorable person. A lot of press were, how do you feel playing someone so unlikable if they'd just seen a couple of episodes? I personally quite like debunking or flouting conventional interpretations of people because, I certainly went through that in school myself, being kind of judged as a blonde bimbo, but really I was quite academic. So actually I'd say I was a nerd. So I think that the idea that Susan is not who she's presented as, I quite liked that Julian did that. And I think it's quite a useful cinematic trope.
Well, it's interesting because I don't think of her as unlikable even from the outset. I feel it's great sympathy towards her. I mean, she would love to be invited to the tea. There's something going on in her life. I mean, she's married to Oliver. They have no children. She doesn't have a role. And she's just looking for a role.
Yeah, I mean, when Julian came to set, which he did early on in the scene that I was about to shoot, which was that when I found out my period was late, when my maids told me where the rags were, he said to me that, to be an intelligent woman in that period in 1840s and many other periods in history and in British history, but certainly that one, which was so kind of tightly engineered socially, you couldn't have a career if you had ambition and intelligence. So all you could do was, to quote Julian, navigate the men in society. So navigate the men around you in order to build a world that was mentally stimulating and creatively fulfilling and didn't leave you dead bored, And I think that she was really, truly bored. And there's only so many dresses you can kind of tailor and make. And so I think that she was using what was available to her to kind of entertain herself, because as we mentioned, she didn't have children with her husband after an 11-year marriage, which he was accusing her of being barren, but the story tells something else.
Well, indeed. I mean, so I think of this intelligent woman and how she ends up with John Bellises. And we can all, I mean, he is sort of like almost cartoonishly villainous. Is that part of his appeal? He's life, he's energy. I mean, Oliver is the wallpaper. I mean, there's nothing to her husband, it seems, in the beginning. Is that the appeal, the bad boy, just as simple as that?
I mean, yeah, there are many interpretations of what, and there are many ways of looking at why a woman goes for a man. But most of all, I think this is sort of slightly underexplored. It's usually people who hit on you. And she certainly wasn't in a position to go around hitting on people. And even some people today don't think it appropriate when women make the first move. But he approached her and he was virile, and she was, in that biological way, sort of desperate for a child, not just to keep her busy, but that kind of thing that happens to a woman. And I think that he was there, but also, it wasn't lost on her that he was going to inherit a big title, and that mattered to her. And that mattered to everyone in Victorian society, which is what the show's about, really.
Well, it so is. And you've mentioned Julian Fellowes a couple of times. So in your conversations with him about this character, I think you've characterized him sort of as a feminist. And I think it's because really in the book and in the series, I mean, the best characters are women, just like in Downton. Who do we remember from Downton? Lady Mary and Violet. And in this, we remember you and Anne and Lady Caroline. So how does Julian react to such sort of praise that, because he seems very sort of stodgy?
Yeah, he's not at all. He's very light. The thing, I kept accusing him of being a feminist, and I'm in the first kind of round of press, and I'm not sure how he took it. But then I read an article recently where he said, I'm a feminist. So I think I sort of slightly cornered him into admitting his deep empathy with the female position, which he just instinctively has. So that's certainly why I did it, because he wrote my character with such insight, and it was so joyous to play someone like that.
Well, and she's really modern in so many ways, because I know you're saying that, yes, John pursues her, but she responds and engineers meetings and going off. You know, I thought that was so interesting, this idea that she couldn't be unaccompanied. You know, again, it's that intense research that Fellowes does, but the constraints under which these women operated, we had no idea of.
Yeah, I mean, not only could she not be go out unaccompanied, but until the 1880s, 1890s, which we learned from the series Selfridges, there were no public lavatories for women. So you'd have to go home to pee. So you couldn't even go out for very long. And on top of that, you'd change 8 times a day, and you couldn't pee alone. So, because you couldn't lift all those petticoats, which we lived in the show, we couldn't also go to the loo alone. So there's a lot of restrictions on women, which makes it all the more juicy and thrilling when they navigate them, like Susan does. Kind of, she has to navigate a lot.
Well, you mentioned, I mean, the gorgeous costumes by BAFTA winner James Keast. So how much of that informs your character, the idea of having to put on all the petticoats, the way you have to sit in the corsets? Are you an actor who approaches character from the inside out, or does that physical accoutrement help you figure out who you're going to play?
You know, often when you the first sort of round of initiations you have into the people you're going to be working with is the costume department. And so you learn a lot from the costume department and the makeup department. But with James, I was sort of first with him and in North London, and he showed me all these things he was building for me and all these fabrics he was using. And it was sort of through him that I first began to understand Susan's lavish taste and the true meaning of the wealth she had at her fingertips and what that meant for who she was. And so those things really inform it, but also the inflexibility that the costumes, the constriction that they provide is an indication of the constrictions in the society. But beyond that, we had an etiquette coach on set who was stringent about the fact that we mustn't touch our faces or our hair or move in any sort of way, because it was all suggestive and it was all a language. So the kind of the restrictions were endless and definitely helped by the costumes.
You know, as I said, Julian, we love these women that he writes, but you have many scenes with 2 very different men, Oliver and John. So in terms of the acting with Adam James, who's just wonderful, I mean, he's so compelling as John. The energy of those scenes, did you have a lot of time for rehearsal? Do you have that luxury in a TV miniseries?
You know, Adam and I did get a chance at rehearsal, and we didn't always agree on things. And sometimes I did have to really defend my character and defend her feminism and defend her forthright nature. And that was a kind of really good informative process for coming to the set and having the tension. So
that was that energy that you had with Adam, and then it's sort of the languor of Oliver. He sort of seems to have given up on life. Richard Goulding plays your husband, Oliver. And so what was it like in those scenes with him, where you're really the one having to kind of buoy him up and kind of propel the scenes forward?
Yeah, you know, that was a really interesting relationship, and we discussed at length kind of, you know, I think it's really important to discuss the things that don't necessarily happen in front of the camera. So Richard and I discussed the fact that I think we had a almost sort of fraternal relationship, like siblings, and that we actually did, underneath it all and underneath a lot of struggle that we had, love each other. And so I was able to kind of access empathy for him in our scenes. But he definitely struggled, I think, with the death of his sister when he was younger, and probably hadn't recovered from that. And And obviously, maybe the fact that we weren't able to have a child together was a problem for him too. But I think Susan was sort of eminently capable of handling any relationship that came her way. And I think that was to do with the fact that in the book, her mom wasn't mentioned. So she had a sort of independence. She didn't really have a mother figure.
And you talk about the grief that consumes that. And it just seems like Anne, Tamsin Gregg's character, is so consumed by grief, she doesn't have any room in her heart for her son, and certainly not for her daughter-in-law. And as I said, that's what I think engenders my sympathy for Susan from the outset, is that she's sort of at sea. I remember when I was talking to Tamsin, she characterized Oliver as an island. And I feel like Susan was also just this island in that house. And I really, my heart breaks for her. And then fast forward many hours into the story, and when the way John treats her so cruelly and casts her aside, what would have happened to Susan had she not been taken back into the family, had Oliver not taken her back?
Well, you know, the threat was very real for Susan, because in Victorian times there was such a thing as a fallen woman, who was basically a woman who'd had a child out of wedlock or had a sexual relationship with someone out of wedlock, really went that far. So it's sort of destitution was probably awaiting her, apart from the fact that her father was well off, but that might not have even, you know, he might not have even wanted to pay for her. So it was very, like, she was walking, it was Russian roulette in a way, that she was really walking a line. But I think that she got a buzz. I felt from her, and when I played her, I felt that she got a buzz out of walking the line and taking the risks and living on the edge, and kind of life was a battle for her. And so I never pitied her myself, because I never felt that she was a victim. I always felt that she was a warrior. But, you know, when she kind of proposes to John Bellicis and he rejects her so wholeheartedly and so dismissively, I think it only bolsters her more. I think she's someone that kind of gathers strength from adversity, and she kind of endures, and that is where she gets her joy. So having a relationship with her, someone who lives like that, was really, I loved it. It kind of, you know, you learn from your characters, and I learned from her that adversity is only to be kind of to feed you.
And, you know, in the end, her and I moved to the country. I mean, I'd love for Julian to write a sequel to Belgravia so they can make another limited series. Do you think about what happens with Susan and Oliver? Did you sort of ever, and what would their life in the country have been like?
Yeah, I mean, I had a very clear image. I thought about her life before and after, and I think that she would have made it work for a while. And I think that John Bellicis would have returned. Those were just my thoughts about it. But I think she would have continued to be a woman of her own volition, and maybe not stayed in the country as much as he would have liked. I think she would have continued to live a life on her own terms.
Well, listen, I mean, it was really, she was one of the most compelling characters in the book, and I was so thrilled to then watch the show and see you bring her to life, because she was it is one of my favorites. And because I think she encaptures both those times and now, and like I said, she's this modern, it's a credit to you, the job that you did in giving her such life.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I loved her very much, and I think it's hard to not defend your girl. So I was really grateful to play someone I was so happy to defend.
Yeah. Thanks again.